Hi, everyone. I am Jason Morgan, editor of Fleet Equipment. Welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted, the video interview series that connects you with the top minds in the industry. Today, I'm talking with Jason Miller, National Fleet Channel Sales Manager at Cooper Tire and Rubber Company. Jason, how are you doing? How's it going over at Cooper?
I'm doing great. My team manages the big fleet. We've never seen anything quite like this. And listen, when you add up the pluses and minuses, we're really doing pretty well right now.
Right. Nope, still out there supporting customers. I know you said earlier you've been doing getting back on the road a little bit, just staying distant, but still helping people out.
Yeah, I haven't braved the airports yet. So the people I know that have tell me that we're far from a new normal there. So we're putting some miles on the cars, but we are trying to get out to see some trucks. We're trying to see some tires that we've got running and testing, evaluate against competitors. So we are getting out there, but most of our time is spent with equipment right now, not with people.
Yeah, for sure. I think my time is coming here soon whenever they let me out of this little box that I feel like I live in this little video thing. So today, for those that we can't get to today, we are going to talk about tire maintenance tips, right? Because that's one of the biggest fleet costs. It's always good to stay on top of that. So we'll dive right in here. And of course, when you talk about tire maintenance, one of the biggest things always comes up: tire inflation, right? Um, so right now, in addition to the typical tire inflation best practices that I know we talk a lot about, what are some maybe other tips in terms of inflation or things that people should pay attention to when maybe they have less resources, they can't interact with people the way they normally do, they're trying to stay connected, rest areas, truck stops, closures, that kind of thing. What are some tips for staying within that correct inflation range?
Well, so listen, the inflation pressure, I can't think of anything more important than inflation pressure. And gosh, it's such a boring topic because keeping air in tires, it's just hard to get people really excited about. There's nothing sexy about tires. There's nothing sexy about airing up tires. But an engineer told me something early in my career. He told me that really the tire is not what carries the load, the air carries the load. So if you want to visualize how important air is, when you've got 80,000 pounds rolling down the highway at 60 to 70 miles an hour, there's two things that matter. One is how much those sidewalls are flexing, because if they're flexing too much, they build up heat and they could fail. And the second is the shape of that contact patch. You kind of have to visualize that there's really only about the width of two hands, this much ground contact between the tire. And you want to make sure that that's the best possible shape for starting, stopping, turning. And so you're managing the flexing of the sidewall and the shape of that contact patch. And you're doing that through inflation pressure. So the inflation pressure doesn't need to be a set number. It needs to be a number that carries the amount of load. And when you're trying to find that number, of course, the steer axle is the most consistently loaded tire on the truck because of the engine. So a typical 80,000 pound configuration has 12,000 pounds on your steer, 34 on the drive, and 34 on the trailer. When you take 6,000 across two tires, I'm sorry, 12,000 on the steer across two tires, that's 6,000 pounds per tire. 34 across eight drive tires is only 4,250 pounds per tire. So you need a full 110 psi on a typical steer tire, and even more if you're running a heavy axle like a 13,000 pound axle. You need quite a bit less than that on the drive tires. So you start, if you're trying to do the right thing to make sure to maximize your tire effectiveness, you start with making sure you have the right number you're trying to get it to. And for steer tires, that needs to be upwards of 100 to 110 psi. And on drive tires, fully loaded, can carry that somewhere about 85 to 90 psi. So let's start with the right number. Once you have the right number on the inflation pressure, now it's just a question of keeping it there. And keeping it there is a daily task because the most of the tire problems we see aren't something that just happened this morning and caused a failure today. Most of the tire problems that we see are gradual air loss. Picks up a little nail, picks up a little screw, leaks out a little bit, goes 3, 4, 5, 6 days without being caught. So that is the importance of the pre-trip. And we don't really think a lot about post-trip, right? Because the day is over, we're running harder, they're long days now, especially if you're one of the essential services. And I mean, the poor drivers, men and women that are out there serving our country, trying to keep us making it through this crazy time. If I tell you, look, it's a hot, rainy day, you just finished a long shift, man, you want to get home to your family. By the way, why don't you grab a gauge and go check your tires?
Right.
It's a lot. It's a lot to ask. But catching them at night after you stop the run at least gives you an opportunity before you get back in that truck tomorrow to have somebody take care of it. Otherwise, if you walk in the morning and you've got a low tire, who's got time for that?
Right. Right.
So, there's a lot to this. And even the gauges, the gauges go out of calibration.
Mm.
So if you're going to buy a gauge, the difference between a high quality calibratable gauge and a non-calibratable gauge, a calibratable might be $30, a decent quality non-cal might be 20. For $10, why bother? Well, just get the better gauge. And you can go to any decent tire shop and they'll have a master gauge because they check theirs. So just stop in and say, hey, do you mind if I check my gauge? They'll have something on the wall. It's probably set to 100. Put your gauge on it. If you're plus or minus that number, you turn a little screw in the base of it, boom, you're back in business.
Right. Right. Now, and I want to go back because I know you said it's hard to get excited about tire inflation, and I get that too. On the other hand, it's really excited. It's really easy to get excited about operating profitably and efficiently, and that's, I mean, as you pointed out, in these really trying times where margins are thinner than they ever were, and jobs for some fleets are few and far between. Really going back to basics, and the blocking and tackling of this can make a huge difference in that operation and that profitability for sure.
Yeah, sure. So I constantly remind my guys that we can save fleets more money by helping them with maintenance than we can by tire selection. Cooper makes an exceptionally high quality product. The sad reality is many of our competitors also make an exceptionally high quality product. If I run into a fleet that tells me that there's 3 or 4 tire brands on a list that they think stink, that are bad brands, my brain starts thinking probably maintenance. Because if they're brands I've heard of that have been around a while, the chance of having that many brands with a problem, if it's that many of them, maybe it's me, you know. So we can do a much bigger savings by helping you with maintenance. And the tire's a great component. One thing I've loved about tires, and I've been playing with it for a long time, is there's no other component on a truck that an inexperienced non-technician without a technician's training can actually look at and troubleshoot. It You can't look at an alternator and figure out if it's almost worn out and going to fail. You can't look at a fuel pump and see if it's almost worn out or if it's going to fail. But you can with a tire. And the other thing about a tire is the tire is a witness to so much more that's going on in that truck. If the truck's running at high speeds, it'll have a possibly different wear pattern. If the truck is got an alignment issue, if the truck has got a weight imbalance, if the truck has got driver's got a lead foot, you can find that in a tire. I mean, you can find just about everything that you need to see by looking at that tire on whether or not there's a maintenance issue. You can tell by looking at it. A lot of stuff, maybe it takes a guy who's been looking at a lot of them or a woman who's been looking at a lot of them to try to say, I've seen that before. But I would say, look at trends. Every time you remove a tire, take a look at it. Take a look at it, take a few pictures of it, save it, even if there's nothing exciting or important that you can learn from it now. If you start seeing a regular occurrence, that's something in there that you probably want to know.
Right. And that's really good advice right now because, as I'm sure you know, and everyone's aware that duty cycles have changed dramatically in the past 2 or 3 months. I know really when the pandemic here in the U.S. really started on the onset, hours of service exemptions were relaxed and duty cycles increased considerably. I've talked to fleets that were hauling one type of load and now they're hauling a completely different type of load or a different type of route in an application. What do you foresee the maintenance impact of that being on the tire side? Where will they see that most, and how do they track that?
That's a great question because every news story that I read that talks about duty cycles, that question rolls through my mind. How does that impact what we do? How does it impact the conversations that we're going to have with fleets? And what seems to keep coming up in my mind when I think about this is a word: routine. The best drivers with the best tire programs that get the best wear and the lowest cost out of their tires are the ones that have a routine. They get in their truck, they start it up, they hook up the air, they let the air go ahead and power up the trailer. While they're doing that, they walk around, take a nice look at the tires, stick a gauge on them. They all have the flow-through cap, so they don't have to get on their knees and crawl and pull off a cap. And they check it, they maybe record it. Funny thing is, if you have 10 tires on a truck and they're all at the proper air pressure and one's down 5, you don't really think much about one being down 5. You could air it up, 3 days later it's down 5. You could air it up, 3 days later it's down 5. You know there's a problem with that tire. If you don't have a routine, you miss that. And if it's going down 5 every 3 or 4 days, by the time you catch it, it's probably damaged the tire. So the duty cycles, I think, are making it awfully difficult to have a. I mean, look what you and I are doing right now. Is this anything routine from 3-4 months ago? And we're not even on the front lines with some of the drivers. So I think trying to get back into those routines when you're running this hard and you're trying to make things happen. And gosh, I don't know too many truck drivers before that said we're not working hard enough. So now we're working even harder.
Right.
So if you can find a way to say, look, it's tough, it's harder to concentrate on a routine, but the payoffs will be huge. And it's really maybe another 5 or 10 minutes to sip your coffee before you get in the truck while you walk around and just look at the tires, see if there's any nails that are obvious, stick a gauge on them.
Right. So one of the I guess the silver linings in everything that's been happening is from several reports we've seen that preventative maintenance continues at pretty steady rates. Right, fleets are still doing the preventative maintenance. When a truck's in a bay, what are those kind of more in-depth tire maintenance bullet points that a technician needs to hit, that a fleet manager needs to double check that this inspection was done, these tires were checked? What are those things they need to look at?
Yeah, so when it's in a bay, one thing that I watch them when they pull them in and they work on the tires is I don't see as many of the technicians that I should see taking the time with a flashlight to look around each tire. Look around each tire. And I carry, one of these little spray bottles, like a travel bottle you might use. I'm going to say for hairspray, but
Yeah, no, I don't know what you're talking about.
I no longer need it for hairspray. So
I hear you.
what I do is I keep one of these little bottles and I mix about a fourth or less of Dawn dishwashing liquid or some real sudsy liquid with water. And if I walk around, I just look at the tire, and if I see a little shiny something on the tire, move it around to see if it's a nail and spray a little bit of this Dawn on it and leave it for maybe 20 seconds. And if it foams, you've got a potential very small air loss. Neat thing about doing a daily pre-trip is sometimes that nail is on the bottom, right? So you can't see it, but the next day it'll be here, and the next day it'll be here. And there's certain spots in the tire easy to see. So what should the technician do when it's in the bay? Take a look around. Take a look around and see if you see anything in there. Because again, most of the tire problems are caused by a very small gradual air loss. Second thing I would do if it's in the bay is just do the old fingertip test. Run your hand across the tire. Now, we make something that's called a wear square on our steer tires and our rib tires. And the wear square starts as a square, and then it turns into a C, and then it turns into an L, and then it turns into a line, and then it turns into an exclamation mark. And there's on both shoulders. So you can see if there's an irregular wear from a misalignment starting. But you can also feel that if you just run your hand across the tread. If you feel it choppy one way and smooth the other way, you probably have a toe condition. So if you're spray it, any nails you see to see if they're possibly leaking, go ahead and run your hand across it to see if there's an alignment situation. And even for technicians, check those air gauges regularly.
Right.
So.
Right. No, very good. I mean, I love that. And I think going back to your point earlier about how this is, I mean, I could do this, right? Anyone can do this. And I mean, even worthwhile for fleet managers to even just outfit every truck with a spray bottle, right? That's a pretty easy thing to do, and just double check. The post trip was great too. Jason, really appreciate you taking the time. This was wonderful. I'm excited about tire maintenance now. I'm going to go write a whole bunch about it. So I appreciate you taking the time.
What we do. Thanks so much for having me on the show.